Coming up on today's show.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to.
But you're gonna.
And over winter, it is deer and moose economy in northern Minnesota. But Voyageurs Wolf Project, we've documented eating blueberries.
Recruitment up north in the northeast and the Arrowhead struggled.
Broadcasting from the Mid-Migration Outfitter Studios, this is the Finding Fur and Feathers Hunting Podcast.
How much direction are you getting from the governor?
Minnesota DNR had reintroduced him into this area.
I don't know, maybe you didn't want me to tell the story on the show, but I'm going to tell it anyway.
I knew you were going to go there.
Come and close the entire hunting season.
Oh, well, really?
Pretty easy.
Today's show is brought to you by Haybale Heights on Devil's Lake. Visit haybaleheights.com for more. By Tasman Lake Lodge in northwest Saskatchewan. For Trophy Lake Trout Northern Pike, go to tasmanlake.com. By Ottertail County. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com. And by Lake of the Woods Tourism. Plan your trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
All right, welcome to the show. I'm Brett Amundsen. We've got a good one for you today. I think it's a really interesting topic. It's one that so many people, whether they're in the outdoor world or not, seem to have an opinion on. It's kind of an emotional topic for a lot of people, and we're gonna look at some of the emotion of it, but we're gonna try to take a lot of the emotion out of the conversation and just talk about the realistic, the practicality, the nuts and bolts of wolves in Minnesota. What's going on with them? What is happening with the delisting from the endangered species list? What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to be able to have a hunting and trapping season on here again, on them in here in Minnesota again in the Great Lakes region? Does that mean there are some other management tools? What's the DNR going to do about it? Are they happy to have control of the animals in their state once again? We'll find out. And also, what other research is going on? There's been some very interesting research projects happening in northern Minnesota in regards to wolves, so we're going to talk about that. We'll also discuss the relationship with deer in Minnesota as we gear up for the gun deer season here in Minnesota. So we're going to bring on our guests right now. First of all, we have Craig Engwall. He's the Executive Director of the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association. Craig, thanks for coming back.
Hey, good to see you, Brett.
Good to see you. Also, we have Dave Olfelt. He's the Fish and Wildlife Division Director at the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Dave, thanks for being on the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Brett.
And also Dr. Joe Bump. He's with the University of Minnesota. Your full title would take us half the show to get through. But tell us what you do there at the University of Minnesota, Joe.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, first of all, for having me on, Brett.
You bet.
I teach wildlife management, wildlife ecology classes, and conservation biology, and I work at that intersection of kind of wildlife management and conservation. So part of my lab is working on the Voyageurs Wolf Project, and that's a great study here in Minnesota in collaboration with the National Park Service.
Well, hopefully we get LCCMR figured out here soon so you guys can get some funding again. I know how you feel. We're in the same boat with Prairie Sportsman, so hopefully that
gets... we've had great support in the Environmental and Natural Resource Trust Fund, and we hope it continues if we can get it worked out for the near future.
Very good. Well, let's go right into it. Dave, let's start with you because from the DNR standpoint, I know you just basically do what you're told to do, I guess, in a sense. Maybe this isn't the best way to say it, but the feds put the wolves back on the endangered species list a few years back. We had 3 years of hunting and fishing, and in some private conversations I've had with different members of the DNR, they did not want to give up control of management of wolves, and rightfully so. And it's got to be nice to be able to have those back under your control, I'm sure.
Well, Brett, it hasn't happened yet. What happened last week is the Fish and Wildlife Service announced its decision to delist the wolves in the lower 48. In Minnesota, wolves have been threatened, classified as threatened. And actually yesterday, the announcement got posted in the Federal Register, and so the clock starts ticking now. In 60 days on January 4th is when the rule would take effect. So nothing's really happened yet. But to your question, we've we've been managing wolves all along. We haven't had the sort of a full suite of management tools available to us, but we've been managing wolves in cooperation with the federal government. And as you mentioned, we have a history of 3 years back in the mid-teens of having full management authority, and are confident that if things stay on the course that they are on, that we can manage wolves for their long-term sustainability in the state.
Were you surprised when that announcement came out, like everybody else in the country the other day?
Well, the feds proposed their rule over a year ago, so they've been signaling that it's imminent. And so at some point you stop paying attention to what imminent is. And so we've been expecting something, whether or not it would have happened last Thursday or not. I mean, that's speculation.
I remember at the DNR roundtable last year, there was rumors going around that it was going to come in March. I thought
those were the signals at the time. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So it finally happens, and then because of that, in 2019, the DNR revisited the wolf management plan, correct? And there was going to be a public opinion comment period through the beginning of November, and that's been extended?
So we started, and Joe, I forgive me, I think you're on either a technical committee or advisory committee. Which one?
I'm part of the technical committee.
Okay. So about a year ago, we kicked off a process to refresh the wolf plan. The wolf plan, we have a plan in place, but it was signed in 2001. So it's time to refresh it. So we kicked that off in the fall, put together a technical committee that Joe is part of. We have a citizen advisory committee as well. And so there's been, and then COVID hit, so that kind of threw a little wrench in actually how do you get together and do stuff. So we've been working on that over the summer. We've had the committees working. We've had some virtual open houses. And then right now there is an opportunity on our website to provide comments or input rather on wolf management in general. We don't have a draft plan yet. We are hoping to have something for folks to respond to, a written document for folks to respond to by the end of the year, early next year. And then again, that would go out for public comment and review.
What have you been hearing from people about this?
About which part of it? A wolf management plan, or just wolves in general, or?
Yeah, I guess the delisting, and then I'm sure people say, well, you got to get a hunting season going again. I mean, everybody seems to have some sort of opinion. Are you hearing some of the same things, or are you hearing stuff all across the board?
It's all across the board. I'm hearing from folks that think there's, when's the hunt going to start? And then I had somebody that I haven't heard from since college days tracked me down, and he wrote this impassioned email about how wrong the delisting decision was. So it's all over the board.
So the new comment period goes through November 20th, correct?
Yes.
And after that closes, how long of a review process or how long of a process will you go through before you enact a new management plan?
Well, again, we don't actually have. We're using that input that we're asking for right now to help inform what is in the plan.
Oh, okay.
So we don't even have a document yet. That document will be coming out, late this calendar year, early next calendar year. Then there will be then folks can ask for that, see that, and respond to management direction, proposed management direction that will be in that.
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I'm going to.
But you're gonna.
Just for one question, I mean, what are the odds that there wouldn't be hunting and trapping as part of the management plan?
Well, the plan is going to absolutely have to address hunting and trapping. That's and perhaps how it's framed up. I don't know yet. But that's clearly a management option, a management decision that is going to be part of the mix. And so I could see it, kind of talking about some of the sideboards. How would decisions be made around opening a season? What are the criteria? When would you open it? When might you stop it? It'd be based on population levels. But we currently have in statute management. The commissioner has by statute authority to establish a hunting season. That's how it happened in the mid-teens. So that authority is there right now. But there are going to be a lot of conversations that happen before a decision is made.
I'm sure. Well, I had an interesting conversation on a radio station last week when the announcement was made. I was asked to come on and do an interview to give my thoughts on it, and I'm trying to find my notes on it because I'd looked into like some of the money that was paid out to ranchers and pet owners over the years from the Department of Agriculture, and I want to say it was around 100. I think there's $375,000 every biennium of appropriations for that, somewhere in there. So it's like $150,000 a year gets paid out, I think, for wolf depredation. And if I remember, the first year there was 6,000 licenses available for $30 a piece for wolf hunters. So $180,000 from licenses versus $150,000 that we're paying out. I just did some simple math, and I thought it's kind of a no-brainer to bring back a hunting season and be able to try to find a way to use some of that money versus taking money from somewhere else. But that's for a different discussion for other people.
Craig will be happy to weigh in on where the wolf funding money is coming from right now.
Well, and Craig, I wanted to bring you in next on this discussion anyway, because as executive director of the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, I'm sure you were probably pleased to see the news about the delisting.
We were, in a nice segue by Dave, by the way. So a couple points to that. So yes, there's money coming out of deer licenses for wolf management, every deer license paid, and that we feel should be used for those purposes. And so looking back, though, we feel the DNR did a really good job managing the 3 hunts that took place, and I believe it was 12, 13, and 14. And that was based on a previous delisting that was for the Great Lakes states. I don't think anybody really disputes that the wolf has recovered in Minnesota according to the numbers that were established in the Federal Recovery Plan and the Minnesota Management Plan, et cetera. So that hunt was done, hunting and trapping, those seasons were done under the current management plan, which we think works. We think it's totally appropriate to update a plan like everything else you do. And I do sit on the advisory committee as well, so Joe and I have kind of both ends covered here. So in our view, you could work towards planning for a season in 2021 while you're updating the plan and go forward. And as we said, we think DNR did a fine job managing those seasons that they had management authority. They still have that authority under statute. So we would like to see something going forward.
Do you think that something could happen, in your opinion, Craig? Do you think you could see a hunting season next year?
We're certainly advocating for that, and that's something that the legislature can weigh in on as they are wanting to do, and that's what DNR will be addressing in the comments. The comments will speak to that. We know that our view isn't the only view out there. As we hear it on the advisory committee, there are a bunch of different views. But we think, given the history, given the population of the wolf, given how DNR has managed it, it would be totally appropriate to have a season in 2021.
What have you been hearing from the deer hunters around Minnesota this last week?
They're, as you might expect, they're very anxious to have a season. I mean, one thing, I live up in northern Minnesota, so the wolves are here all the time. We are a statewide organization, so if you're in southern Minnesota, it isn't quite the same issue, but it resonates with hunters. It's definitely wolves can have a localized impact on a deer hunt in a deer area. I know DNR has to look at the broader picture as well and how the wolves interact with deer and other species. Moose, it's a big issue with moose as well. So there's a lot of stuff on the table. We believe DNR can manage it. We're glad it's been returned to the state, and we're just looking forward to things happening hopefully in 2021.
Have you?
Hey, Brett,
go ahead, Dave.
Dan was just putting something on the screen there that I'd briefly comment on. One of the pieces of work that the agency has done in conjunction with the University of Minnesota, is a survey of Minnesotans' attitudes about wolves. And it was a social science survey, and one of the groups that we talked to is deer hunters. So deer hunters, cattle producers, and then sort of the general public. So if you want to kind of see how Minnesotans are thinking about and feeling about wolves, I know you said we didn't want to get the feelings, but that's sort of the scientific side of the feelings, and it kind of clarifies some very various views about that. So that's a resource.
Pull that back up one, Stan. Let's take a look at that just for a second. So what did you find in that survey? That go ahead.
Go ahead. So the main three blocks were livestock producers, and they had some of the strongest negative feelings about wolves. Deer hunters, had a slightly different perspective. We're more likely to say, wolves have a right to exist, but I also think want to have an opportunity to hunt or trap them. And then the general public was pretty much opposed to any kind of wolf season, and the attitudes around wolves had more to do about, they have a right to exist. They're an important part of the wilderness or ecosystem. So, in a nutshell, those are some of the, just the varied perspectives that Minnesotans bring to this animal.
Craig, let me ask you this question, because I already put Dave on the spot once. So I'm going to ask this question to you.
Sure.
Do you think that there's...
I'll see if I can bring it back to him as gracefully as he did to me.
Do you think there needs to be... do you think that residents who don't hunt, that may not agree with the hunting season as much as, say, the hunting public does, do you think there needs to be more education for those people, or why do you think they have that opinion?
Oh, I can't speak for them, but their opinion is part of the mix as we move forward on any management of any game or management of land, what have you. I mean, as Dave knows, you can have disputes about forest management or management of wildlife management areas, whether they should be grazed or not, all those things. And you've got a lot of different players at the table, and they inform the decision making. So I'm not surprised they're differing views. I can't speak to what motivates them, but there's nothing wrong with views.
You're right. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I'll put this one on me. I will say that I feel like sometimes the strongest voices in opposition are ones that don't ever step foot outside the city, or that wouldn't have, say, when you talk about grazing on a WMA, that wouldn't have a stake in that game. Like, they'd never step foot on a WMA. They wouldn't have cattle to put out there. They're not pheasant hunters. I feel like there are sometimes some very loud voices that are just like, that's a majestic animal that I see in movies. And not saying that their opinion should be discounted, but it's so hard to take, for me, it's so hard to take their opinions with some sort of validation when I feel like they don't know all the facts. Maybe that's the best way to say it.
And I'd say the best thing you could do is I don't mean you personally, but we could do is have an engaging discussion. Try to get across where we're coming from. You can have those discussions, whether it's dairy products coming from the store. They actually come from Macau, or cutting trees. I mean, people look at a view shed when they're driving along a highway and they think the trees are beautiful, but if you don't manage those trees, you're going to have issues in the forest with disease and forest fires, what have you. So it's really being able to listen to each other and talk and explain where you're coming from, and hopefully you have an opportunity to have some open eyes and open minds.
Well, and honestly, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview, is I want to just try to get the facts out there. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, because you bring that up and the conversations about information, I mean, that's the role, all of us that are involved in the Voyageurs Wolf Project, that's our mission. We are trying to provide information to help any stakeholder, any management group make informed decisions about wolf management. Yeah, and we're really focusing on an understudied period in wolf natural history, that 6-month kind of snow-free, ice-free season, and learning about what wolves are doing, how they're making a living during that time. And it ties into park management, it ties into federal or state management. Wolves are controversial species, but we're trying to provide information in response to controversies that can help. And we are interested in the application, and where we see opportunities for the application of what we're learning and how wolves are moving about the landscape. We're eager to try to inform the management.
Well, I got to tell you, some of the stuff you guys are doing, I think is very cool and very interesting. Like I support a wolf hunting and trapping season and a wolf management plan here in the state. But I also think wolves are fascinating animals. And I think they're cool to hear them howl when you camp in the boundary waters. I don't necessarily want to encounter them when I'm walking out of my deer stand in the dark necessarily. But I think they're cool animals. I think I think they're savages at times, and they are. I mean, that's just a wild animal, but I think they're cool. But some of the things that you're finding out in that research, I think is fascinating. Two things I want to bring up that I want you to talk about a little bit is what
Sure.
you're learning about their relationship with beavers. And then there was a video, maybe start with this video. There was a video that came out, a trail cam video of a wolf catching fish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I got to give a nod to the guys in the field, Tom Gable and Austin Homkis, who are spending 6-7 months out there a year on the ground. And it's really to their credit of observation, their skill, and their natural history that we're learning these things. So the two things you mentioned, we're learning that wolves eat a lot of beaver, particularly some wolves. And it's super fascinating to think about who cues in on beaver within a wolf pack. Is it the older ones? Does it take a lot of learning? But in summer or any ice-free season, beavers are a really good food item for wolves. The second thing we learned, and the royal we, these guys really pulled it off in the field. They noticed wolves because they're wearing GPS collars in the study. That's a key bit of technical equipment. They noticed them hanging out on these streams, and then when they went to investigate, a lot of evidence for fish eating. And we didn't know if they're just scavenging, and it's all white suckers running in the spring. But what they were able to document is that these wolves are actually hunting, hunting and feeding on spawning white suckers. And we've got more data on this, and it's really fascinating. Wolves are adaptable. Like you said, they're fascinating. And if they can make a living off an abundant resource like spawning suckers, it's not too surprising. But we were able to document that for the first time. And I think your position reflects a lot of what Minnesotans feel like. They love their wolves. They're the only state in the lower 48 that kept wolves, and all the wolves that are in Wisconsin and in Michigan had protections and good management in Minnesota to naturally recolonize. So yeah, we share that fascination. It drives a lot of what we're doing. And between the GPS collars and what trail cams and remote cameras are able to capture these days, if you go to the Facebook page for Voyageurs Wolf Project, that's our main outreach avenue for sharing that with the public, just to bring up that interest, like you mentioned. And Tom Gable, if you fire him a question, is awesome about responding.
Well, sorry, I was just going to say, there's a picture. Look at that. There's go ahead, Joe.
No, we had this incredible looking cinnamon black bear. You cruise across the beaver dam. Yeah. So it's mostly wolves on the Voyageurs Wolf Project Facebook page, but we also share that we've had lynx, we've had bobcat. Yeah, good stuff.
There was a post, it was probably a year ago, last winter maybe. It was, see if I can explain this. It was a map graphic, and it showed all the movements from the collared wolves, and it just showed how the packs interact or don't interact with each other, and how you can see straight lines where the packs have their territories.
Yeah, it was a wonderful visualization that Tom put together on wolf territoriality, right? So we get this great state support through the LCCMR to get the collars, get them out there. We get great partnership and support from National Park Service to work with us, because these are all wolves that are in and out of Voyageurs National Park. That's a fantastic graphic showing you a bunch of the pack territories. But we get, and what's special about this project is we are recording a location of our collared wolves every 20 minutes. So we get unprecedented detail on wolf movements. And then we could plot those movements, and it just shows how these individuals really maintain their territories, and very rarely, if they're part of the pack, are they straying into other territories. That's dangerous for a wolf to be on another wolf's turf.
Well, it looks like the Paradise pack is testing the waters a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's trying to find a little space there. It appears in between some others. And what I'll mention there is, that's a pair right now, and
Sure.
A pair we can call a pack. So they're trying to figure out, and this is what wolves do. That these shift, a little bit, maybe annually. It depends on if there's turnover, if a wolf dies, or who disperses into the area and tries to carve out some real estate.
I want to talk, maybe dispel some myths or talk about some of the most frequently discussed topics when it comes to wolves, and about population. Because population definitely ebbs and flows, but there's discussion about a landscape only being able to hold so many wolves. What have you found in your research when you can discuss population trends like that?
Yeah, you know what? It really depends on the food that's available. That's the simplest way I can say it. If you go up north, Arctic Circle wolves, massive territories, because their food sources are dispersed and much lower in other areas. When wolves are in areas with a lot of prey biomass on the landscape, they can pack in, and their territories tend to shrink. So biologists have worked out that if you look at kind of the food availability and the territory size, if there's high food availability, territories on average are smaller. If there's low food availability, territories on average are a lot larger. When we're teaching about this, we might say, think of a territory as kind of the refrigerator where the wolves are making their living when it comes to what they need to survive. Now, that kind of discounts what might be available because of development or habitat loss or urban, those sort of things. But wolves are flexible in terms of territory size depending on food availability.
We're learning a little bit more about their food. Obviously, we talked about the beaver and the fish too, the suckers. A lot of people think they're just out there eating all our deer and moose, and obviously they are definitely eating some of the deer and moose out there. But they eat whatever they can find, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. They're going to take advantage of any calories on the landscape that are easily had. And over winter, it is deer and moose economy in northern Minnesota. But Voyageurs Wolf Project, we've documented eating blueberries. I've observed wolves in the past eating apples. You can pick through their scat and find all kinds of stuff. There's papers out there that have wolves eating, a bunch of grasshoppers when they're hyperabundant. So they're going to take advantage of resource abundance. And the summer diets, because they're more challenging to study in the North Woods, are where we're learning some of these new cool bits of natural history.
I could watch these videos all day. I think watching them eat blueberries. When it comes to eating deer and moose or any other food source that they find, you'll hear people say that they're just out there killing for sport. And when somebody says that to you, what do you tell them?
I tell them they usually return, to kills, particularly if it's in winter. And we find that on initial observations, when a carcass looks like it's not that well utilized, wolves are not different than a lot of species, including ourselves. They're going to high grade, but they might return. We find kills that are years old that wolves return to chew on the bones and see what they can get and then move on. So that's one observation. And then I'll acknowledge, that sometimes, usually in like these polar vortex winters, or when there's a really tough time and prey appear to be really vulnerable, that you do see spikes in kill rates, and maybe less initial utilization. And I think that's where that impression comes from, where they seem to eat the organs and moved on or something like that. I would say keep watching, set up a trail cam and see if they come back.
That'd be cool. That would be cool to have a trail cam on a kill site like that. Craig, we had a pretty decent winter last year, pretty decent spring for wildlife. Pheasant numbers where I'm at are up. A lot of wildlife. I think I've seen more turkeys out here than I've seen in the last few years as well. How did our deer fare in the last year?
You've talked about the South, and you highlight that Minnesota is just such a big, different state with, so I live in northern Itasca County, and we had a lot of snow early through New Year, very deep snow all year. And so the fawn recruitment up north in the Northeast and the Arrowhead struggled. I mean, our numbers are not great. I don't expect them to be improved at all in this area. But if you're in that ag transition zone, there's so many deer. I wish they could balance them out up here a little bit. But it really depends where you are. I think overall we'll have a solid season. I think we'll have hopefully a good harvest number for a couple of reasons. The weather looks pretty good going into this opening weekend, and hunter numbers, and Dave can speak to this. The last I heard, they were up about 8% in deer license purchases, reflecting what we've seen in fishing and small game licenses and other outdoor activities, which is about the only positive I can think of our last 8 months and what we've all been dealing with. So we'll see where those numbers end up, and hopefully we'll get more people in the woods and we can retain them and keep them as outdoors people.
My gosh, there's pheasant hunters everywhere. And I know waterfowl hunters everywhere. I know guys that went, Dan, maybe you went to North Dakota. There was waterfowl guys all over that state. So I bet you'll hear a lot of, as long as there's deer around, I bet you'll hear a lot of banging Saturday morning. Dave, is that what you're hearing? A lot of license sales?
Yeah, I figured you were going to ask this question, so I looked up the numbers from a couple days ago, and 225,000 firearms licenses sold to date, which is up about 6% from the same time last year. You got to go back to 2016 to have license sales, at the same day, number of days before the opener. But many people are going to be buying their licenses today, tomorrow, and Friday. So.
And you could plan ahead and get a lifetime license like me, then you don't have to worry about it.
There you go. I like it. Craig, can you believe we've gone this long on the show so far, talking mostly about wolves, but also about deer, and haven't brought up chronic wasting disease at all yet?
Yeah, and I know Dave, and I want him to chime in on this too. So one of the things we're looking at is the testing in the areas, the CWD zones, and the challenges that the pandemic has brought, where there's no mandatory testing this year. And I know the voluntary testing has come up somewhat short. We're trying to encourage as many people, hunters, to participate as we can, because we need that good data. And again, Dave, you can speak to this about what Barb and the crew are doing, but they can extend that sampling, but that's not the best answer. The best answer would be to get a good verifiable data from this year to help in seeing what's happening on the landscape. I'm also working on the Board of Animal Health is doing some proposed amendments to their rules governing captive cervids. I don't think it's a surprise we're not really enamored with how they're regulating the captive side of the world. We appreciate the efforts of DNR in being aggressive on the wild deer side, but we don't think as a state we're doing as well on the captive side.
What do you think, Dave, has there been any more discussion about expanding rifles into the southern part of the state?
That was a topic in the legislature last year, and then things went goofy, and I'm not sure that's,
Things went goofy in the legislature? No.
Well, and that and COVID, and then the license, it's I can't say whether it's going to come up again or not this year, and we're working on our policy package. I'm not able to comment on that until the governor advances it, but it could certainly come up again.
Well, just for anybody listening, and whenever I've talked about this in the past, we always thought it was because it was flatter and not as many trees in the southern part of the state, and that's why rifles weren't allowed. But every time I asked the DNR about it, they said, well, no, we just wanted to make it a little bit more difficult for you to shoot deer in the southern part of the state. So it's an interesting, it's a small topic, but it's an interesting one, and I think there were some myths about the use of rifles in the southern part of the state. So I think you'd see a lot of support for that.
I'll jump in, Brett, too, that in our organization that came up, and we had that discussion, a lively discussion, and we were informed by what DNR enforcement, others were saying what other states have done and what they've seen with no increase in accidents. So a majority of our membership supported that change if it comes to the table.
Well, with the amount of...
I will have to say that... I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dave.
Last spring and winter, I got some pretty impassioned phone calls from people that didn't want to see it changed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so former DNR people that said, retired DNR people that said, no, that story about it being for protecting deer, that's not the whole story. So I'm not sure. There's different narratives out there anyway, and so it'll be a good conversation, and we'll see where it heads.
Joe,
I'd like to chime in if that's cool, Brett.
Absolutely.
Because it relates to an opportunity, a really unique opportunity for hunters to help out when it comes to understanding some of the dynamics that might connect wildlife species and CWD. So we got a project going in the lab that's called the OFFAL, OFFAL, Wildlife Watching Project. I sent a link to it in the chat there if you want to bring it up. And we're really interested in partnering with deer hunters to do this, to help us monitor right after they field dress the animal, if they field dress it in the wild, and if they can set up a camera. And a lot of hunters have cameras because we want to know for about a month period who visits that site. So that'll help us better understand the scavenging community that visits that site. And we actually have deer documented visiting gut piles and consuming gut piles. So it has implications for CWD transmission. It has implications for lead exposure to broader species. And these are important questions for applied wildlife management. So if Minnesota hunters, deer hunters, want to add to what they do already in terms of reporting and helping out, they can participate in this project by getting a camera out on their gut piles. We have limited resources to provide some cameras. We're working with Craig, and MDHA was a letter writer and supporter for trying to get this project funded through the LCCMR this past year. We got great feedback, just missed, and I think we'll have another shot at it in the future. So this will be ongoing. And then hunters can actually help identify what species are in the images through this site once we have the data back. So it's a great opportunity.
Has there been
a great project?
Have you seen anything in your pictures that made you go, I did not expect to see that?
Yeah, a couple times. Well, the number of deer that visit a gut pile is a little surprising sometimes. We've got all the carnivore scavengers you would expect. And even from wolves and bears right on down to weasels. Pileated woodpeckers have been on our piles. And then there's this really cool observation where owls are in. But what we don't know is if they're coming in and nailing mice that have come around the piles, or small mammals, or if they're getting a bite or two themselves. Yeah.
Neat.
Brett, can I say a few things about CWD too?
You bet.
So Craig articulated the surveillance, the work that people might be familiar with for sampling lymph nodes and sending those into the lab to get tested for CWD. And we aren't going to be running the check stations, those crazy mixed up check stations that we've run the last few years because of the concern over, spreading COVID, between our workers and hunters and all that kind of stuff. So we have a different approach, and it's relying on volunteers to provide samples, actually take the heads and put them into barrels that we have salted around the landscape, and we'll collect them, and then we take out the lymph nodes. So that's one part of it, and we have had awesome compliance when we've had mandatory sampling. We don't need or expect that same level of compliance in order to really know where the disease is on the landscape. But we strongly encourage people to participate in that. But in terms of managing the disease, managing the spread of the disease, our bedrock tools are the carcass transport rules. So the places in the state where we know that CWD is on the landscape in the southeast, unfortunately now South Metro and in that area around Brainerd, you can't move your deer, a whole deer, without getting a not positive test, or not detected test rather, or quartering it out. So please pay attention to that. It's movement of carcasses, live or dead, is one of the primary ways that CWD can move long distances on the landscape. So really, please pay attention to that. And then there's a little bit of positive news and some other news that about CWD in general in the state. We had a surveillance area in Litchfield area, part of the state, for the last 3 years. We did 3 years of sampling there, found no disease in the wild, so we don't need to sample there anymore.
Nice, good.
This is our third year in the Brainerd area. We found that one deer 3 winters ago. Haven't had another one despite many thousands of deer sampled. So fingers crossed there. The prevalence rate in the southeast is staying, pretty, it's 1%-ish, something like that, which is not great, but it's not exploding.
Yeah.
But we had a farm near Alex that tested positive this year, so now we have surveillance around that. A farm in Pine County that tested positive, so now we have surveillance around that. And then that deer in the wild in Farmington, and in the wild, of course, that's a serious concern. So we're still managing aggressively, using the tools in the toolbox, the carcass transport, the feeding restrictions, and keeping the pedal to the metal to the extent we can.
For those people that shoot a deer in those areas where there's carcass movement restrictions, and they get a test, how long do they have to wait for that test? And what can they do with their deer in the meantime? Well,
so there's options. One is they can quarter it out immediately and take that meat. As long as you don't take the head and the spine out, you can take your meat with you. And we actually have butchering stations set up and dumpsters in strategic places in those areas of the state where CWD is in the wild to help hunters with that. So that's one option. The other is, as you said, not taking it out of the zone and waiting for the sample results to come back. And we turn those around quickly. We depend a lot on how fast the lab can turn it around. We have a new lab this year because of some concerns last year and had an opportunity to change. So our preferred time frame is like 3-day turnaround. But at crush periods like right after opening weekend, or that might be a little bit longer. So we staff up to process samples based on what we expect the harvest to be. So opening weekend, it's pretty much all hands on deck. People are going to be running around collecting heads out of barrels and taking them to garages and shops and cutting out lymph nodes and packaging up to send to the lab.
Important work. Unfortunate that it has to be done. Important work.
Thanks for letting me pontificate there a little bit.
Absolutely, of course. I want to back up just 1 second to something that Joe was talking about, and that comes to what's feeding on some of these carcasses. And when it comes to lead, like we filmed a segment for Prairie Sportsman last year on it was copper versus lead when it comes to mainly big game or mainly whitetail, because that's what we have here in Minnesota. But the amount of fragmentation of lead in some of that meat. I mean, first of all, how are we not? Obviously, we're consuming some of that. You try to cut around it, but the difference between that copper bullet and that lead bullet, for a long time, I was probably one of those guys too that hear about, oh yeah, copper's better or whatever, but lead is cheap and it's effective and this and that. Until I saw the actual display of what it does and how much lead goes splinters throughout your meat. I wanted to go throw all my lead in the garbage, because I don't gun hunt as much as I used to. In fact, I haven't gun hunted for a number of years, but I still have a couple of boxes of cartridges, and in the closet of lead bullets. I'll give them away if somebody else wants them. I don't want to shoot lead anymore.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Brett, particularly when it comes to the hunting. But, I've got students ask me this question all the time. What do I do? And I say, look, you can take that all to the range. It's great.
Yeah,
you blow through it out, go through your lead and drop in just a couple of the expensive ones, right? And then you're set for the field. I mean, that's what I do. But, yeah, it's a powerful demonstration when you see the size of the fragmentation and the lead dust that can permeate through an animal. Yeah. Well,
and not just that, I shoot a lot of pheasants, and I've shot lead for a long time at pheasants, and I know there's discussions about the effect of eating, a lead pellet for a human versus say a bald eagle or something like that. But there's a couple, I started shooting this copper plated bismuth. I just did a couple of videos for Boss Shot Shells where we were doing some pattern testing, and the amount, just everything about it, like the non-toxicity of it, to be able to shoot it on federal lands and state lands as well. And then the pattern density and the knockdown power of it. I'm just getting rid of all lead for everything I do. And Craig, what's the position for MDHA, and what are you hearing from deer hunters out there as far as, nobody wants to mandate lead usage, and I know the DNR has discussed maybe switching to all non-toxic on WMAs and state lands as well, and I wasn't necessarily for that. I'm not necessarily against it now, but I wasn't necessarily for that for a while, because from a lot of people that I've talked to, we'd prefer to see it become a choice made by hunters out there versus a mandate. What are you hearing from deer hunters out there about non-toxic alternatives? And I'm assuming eventually it's gonna be mandated. Eventually, it's gonna happen. Just how soon it happens is a question.
And you kind of laid out our view as an organization. We want good information out there. We've run a number of articles in our magazine about non-toxic ammo. I personally use copper myself. So we put as much info out there for our members and deer hunters as possible. We're not big on the mandate side, so we want to let people make their own decision. But if they, you changed your view and others may change theirs, and if they transition on their own, that's great. So we don't have a formal position. Our position would be that we support voluntary choices, but we want the information out there for hunters to digest.
Well, and like that segment that we did, I think it was Brian Hiller that said it, from Bemidji, said the more education we can do about it, the more examples we can show, the more demand there will be, and that will show manufacturers, hey, there's more people wanting these options out there. Let's start making more of it. That's going to bring production costs down. That's going to change the equipment, and it's going to make it a more affordable option out there. And it's definitely an effective option. I think the price point has been the issue for a lot of hunters out there. But as the cost comes down, I think more and more people are going to realize it's a viable option. I want to bring up one more topic before I let you guys go here. And Dave, maybe you can speak to this. Maybe you have nothing to say about it at this point, but I want to see some elk in the northeast part of Minnesota. When are we going to see that? Next year.
2 years. 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 2 ye the Fond du Lac band has, as you well, I'm sure you've talked about it on your show, as you well know, has done some preliminary work on the idea of reintroducing elk in northeastern Minnesota. We are in conversations with them. There's a long way to go, and it's not going to be next year for sure.
Right.
But just the idea of where elk are going to, they're not going to stay where they're put. They're big animals. They're going to move around. We have there are issues with landowner tolerance in northwestern Minnesota.
Right.
I'm not so sure. I'm convinced that they're that different in northeastern Minnesota. But again, those are conversations that will happen. And then, on top of that, disease concerns. So it'll be a while, but conversations ongoing.
Craig, how does MDHA feel about elk reintroduction in the Northeast?
Yeah, we submitted a letter of support for Fond du Lac for LCCMR funding to study the issue because elk are a great species, and we have a lot of members who hunt them and are interested in them. But we wanted to let that process take its course. So we want to see where that goes, how the public feels about it. And so that pretty much captures where we are. One thing we did, and we've been pretty aggressive, and this goes back to CWD, as an organization, we've stated that we're opposed to any interstate movement of cervids, whether they're whether they're captive or wild. So, we take CWD seriously. We now that we do have elk in Minnesota, that might be a possibility, but we're paying attention to it. We're interested, but we haven't taken a final position on whether that be a good thing or a bad thing.
I think for sure the animals would come from the Northwest, which would make the landowners up there probably happy to see some of those populations shrink just a hair. And then, I think the Wisconsin reintroduction, if I remember correctly, when they first started reintroducing elk in Wisconsin, it was actually a research project with one of the universities, if I remember. It was something, and then after a number of years, when it was successful, the DNR eventually took it over. So, Joe, I think I got another project for you.
Oh, yeah. And, well, my colleagues are on it. They're the ones doing the habitat assessment. So the U is involved and there to kind of do that research. And we do collaborate. So, yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Very good. Well, all interesting stuff. Very topics that are important, I think, to a lot of outdoorsmen and outdoors people, I think I'm supposed to say now, outdoors enthusiasts. How about that? Across the state, and also people that are not necessarily outdoors enthusiasts. Obviously, wolves are important to a lot of people in the state. So I just want to get the facts out there and talk about what's been happening and what's coming down the line. Gentlemen, I really appreciate all of your insight and all of the work that you guys do. Keep up the good work, and thanks for the time here on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Everybody have a great season and a safe season.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brett. Our
Thank
pleasure.
you.
This has been the Finding Fur and Feathers Hunting Podcast, part of the Sporting Journal Radio family. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts or visit us at findingfurandfeathers.com.
Looking for fall adventure? Might as well pick a place with over 1,000 lakes. Ottertail County, Minnesota is in the middle of everywhere, offers a simpler pace, and has something for everyone. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com.
Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Haybale Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Haybale Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today. If you want to have success fishing in Minnesota, you have to go where the fish are. And there may be no lake with more fish in it than Lake of the Woods. Not just big numbers of walleye, sauger, perch, eel pout, pike, muskie, bass, and sturgeon, but numbers of big fish too. Between the Rainy River, the main lake, and the Northwest Angle, you have over 50 resorts to choose from. Guided fishing allows for heated transportation to heated fish houses. Learn how to book a trip now at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. That's lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
TasmanLake.com. If trophy lake trout and monster northern pike are on your list this summer, book a trip to Tasman Lake Lodge in northwestern Saskatchewan.
Everything from numbers to big fish.
See pictures, videos, and more at TasmanLake.com.
This is quite the fishery.
Our 5-star chef will feed you well after a day of chasing giants on Tasman Lake.
Dream come true.
Get rates, dates, and more of what you can expect.
It could be the best fishing you've ever had in your life.
At TasmanLake.com. That's TasmanLake.com. Tasman Lake Lodge is a proud partner of Tourism Saskatchewan.